Jeffrey, thank you very much indeed for a very punchy, challenging start to our session here. Could I also just take this opportunity to say welcome to Dorothy Tembo, who joins us, Executive Director of the Enhanced Integrated Framework as well. Thank you very much indeed. Now, to Alex. Alex Barkawi is the former MD of SAM indexes, plus Dow Jones Sustainability Indexes, where he was responsible for worldwide marketing, sales and licensing, and is now building up an economic policy think tank for sustainability. Alex, the issues that I think you're going to be looking at are resource constraints, investment horizons, critically, and corporate lobbying. So, over to you.
Hey, thanks, David. Good morning, everybody. Let me start off by thanking all of you for taking me on such a steep learning curve over the last 24 hours, because as you've heard from David, my bio includes neither a strong relation to the tourism industry nor to LDC, so the many fantastic insights that have been shared here over the last 24 hours have been extremely valuable for me. Now, if this was the 8th wedding night, this is now the morning after, so I guess it's even more difficult, but I'm going to give it a try. I spent the last several years at the intersection of sustainability, financial markets, academia, and now most recently, economic policies. And I'd like to use the upcoming minutes to try and link that background with what I've learned over the last 24 hours here and touch upon the 3 points that David already mentioned. We think that crude oil production has already peaked in 2006, and just to stay where we are today, we have to find 4 new Saudi Arabias. I thought it's appropriate to use a quote from a citizen of our host country, Dr. Birol, the chief economist of the International Energy Agency. Dr. Birol is not the only one making forecasts that are that concerning, and oil is not the only resource for which such forecasts are being made. And I think that also links up to what Jeffrey said. We will have carbon constraints, but I think we'll also see a lot of resource constraints in other fields, such as fossil fuels, such as water, and other commodities. And I think if we really want to plan for the long term, for any industry, including the tourism sector, these issues of resource constraints need to be on our agenda. Yesterday, several speakers talked about the importance of infrastructure in building up tourism. Clearly, a world that is scarce on fossil fuels must look very different in terms of the energy and transportation infrastructure. Clearly, a world that has scarcities in water must account for that issue when assessing how many tourists can come to a certain region. And I think these issues also need to be on our radar screen when we assess what price the visitors will pay that will need to travel to get to us. So that's my first point. Resource constraints are becoming increasingly important. Second point relates to investment horizons. And David mentioned earlier that short-termism is prevalent. Investors tend to think about quarterly earnings. And if you look at this slide, you see that over the last 50 years, the average holding period of stocks on the New York Stock Exchange has gone down from more than 8 years to less than 1 year. So an investor who puts money into a stock on the New York Stock Exchange buys and sells that stock within less than 12 months. Now, clearly, the type of issues that we talked about yesterday need a much longer time horizon. It can't be done within 12 months. And I therefore believe strongly that we all need to find ways how to expand the investment horizon, and to ask ourselves where we might actually be able to influence investments. And I know I'm being a pain, but I'll say it again. The fact that the UN Pension Fund is not adapting these criteria, even though all UN agencies in some way or the other have a sustainability agenda, is, to put it mildly, fascinating. And to come back to Patricia's point yesterday, in terms of commitments, I think this conference would offer a great event, since so many UN agencies are here, to give another push to the UN Pension Fund and actually move to a more long-term investment horizon. Someone could help me to get the next slide. Okay. Last point, on corporate lobbying, something that has not been that much on the agenda with regard to sustainability. Let me share two quotes. The first one from, I guess it will be your successor or the successor of your successor, Jeffrey, the president and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, who, in the most recent newsletter of that association, said the following: short-sighted governments recognize the value of travel and tourism only when it is in crisis, or as a cash cow to be milked at every opportunity. It is time public policy makers implement taxation measures that fully reflect the export value of this industry. A couple of weeks earlier, the Financial Times reported that ExxonMobil urged the regulators to allow deepwater drilling to resume in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I don't want to get into a debate on whether taxes in the tourism industry are too high or too low. And I don't want to get into a debate whether deepwater drilling makes sense or not. But what I do want to point out is that taxes are critical for governments to deliver all the type of things that were talked about yesterday as a prerequisite for tourism. That deepwater drilling, as we saw in the Gulf of Mexico, can have tremendous impacts on tourism, and that therefore the position of companies on these issues matter a lot. And thus I believe that increasing transparency and engaging with the corporate sector, not only on PPPs, not only on corporate social responsibility, but also on the question what companies and associations do within their corporate lobbying work, should be on our agenda and would offer significant opportunities. Many thanks.
Alex, thank you. We're playing musical chairs up here as well as having post-wedding parties. It's great. Alex, thank you very much indeed for that. At this point, can I just say also, once our speakers have all had their initial say, we really do want to hear from you. There may be questions you have already, there may be remarks you'd like to make, in which case, just let me know, hand up, you can tell us who you are and you'll have a chance to have your say as well. But this is critically important and part of what we hope will develop now into a conversation between us all as we move along. The issues of ethical and socially responsible investment increasingly seen as a prerequisite to drive inclusive, sustainable development in the tourism sector. And to talk about that for us, Amanda Ellis joins us, Deputy Secretary for International Development of New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where she manages the New Zealand Aid Programme, and formerly, just point out, lead specialist on poverty reduction and economic management for the World Bank Group. Amanda, thank you.
Kia ora koutou tatoa. Greetings from New Zealand, and I've just spoken to you in Māori, which is the language of our Indigenous people, and New Zealand's second official language. It's a real honour to be here today and to speak to you from a donor perspective on the value of ethical and responsible investment, and particularly public-private partnerships. About 20 years ago, I went on my first posting with the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it was to a very beautiful set of Pacific islands. And one weekend, I ventured off to what was renowned as one of the most beautiful islands in the entire world, completely unspoiled. And I asked one of the locals why there were no tourist facilities. And they said to me, oh, there used to be huge hotels and lots of tourist traffic. But the locals were completely excluded. And so one day they decided to just burn down all the facilities, and the investors hadn't come back. New Zealand, interestingly, depends very much on tourism. As a country, it's our second largest foreign exchange earning after the dairy industry. So 1 in 10 New Zealanders is employed in the industry. And yet we receive only 0.3% of annual tourist arrivals. Now, we heard yesterday, over the last 20 years, year on year, in the LDCs alone, there's been an increase of 11% per annum in tourist arrivals. And if you look at the receipts last year of some $850 billion, this is a huge opportunity for growth and development. But it needs to be managed in a way that is not just about revenue, but also includes local participation and the maintenance of environment and cultural heritage. I've been asked specifically to look at issues of ethical and responsible investment, and I guess they're clearly bad things. If we look around and consider the growth in human trafficking, for example, which has become such a key part of tourism in Asia, if we look at corruption in supply chains, if we look at the degradation of natural environments, we look at the exclusion of locals from the benefits from tourism, and the disrespect and discrimination against Indigenous peoples. These are obviously all on the negative side of the ledger of potential tourist investments. And I wanted to pay tribute to the work that the UN system is doing at a macro level in terms of the UN Global Compact, the UN Convention Against Corruption, and the Equator Principles that the International Finance Corporation at the World Bank have been promoting, so that companies who are investing in a whole range of industries in developing countries sign up to environmental and socially sustainable principles. It's very important to have that macro framework so that it's not just happening at the national level, but there is an overarching set of global principles. And on the positive side, I wanted particularly to recognise some of the proactive work that is promoting ethical, sustainable investment. Looking, for example, at the UN Women's Empowerment Principles and the ITC's recent work. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to look at the Global Platform for Action on sourcing from women vendors who get about 1% of global business. But these kinds of proactive efforts to educate and to help the business community understand that it's not only the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do from a business perspective. So to give you a couple of examples of where New Zealand has been helping in the Pacific Islands, where there have been instances of unregulated development. In one Pacific island, unfortunately, overdevelopment due to under-regulation has led to significant pollution of the lagoons. And guess what? The tourists don't want to come and go snorkeling anymore. So we are working with that country to now try and clean up the lagoon. Another Pacific Island country where tourism and real estate have been a really big part of economic growth over the last decade. But unfortunately, the boom has been mostly an expatriate boom, and the locals are now starting to get quite agitated about the lack of their engagement and involvement in sharing the benefits. And so we're now working to try and move to a diverse range of locations, to include sourcing from local suppliers, to make sure that training opportunities for locals to actually work in the service industry all aligns so that there is a preservation and an appreciation for indigenous assets as well. Now, in Cambodia, we are working with the government agency that looks after Angkor Wat to make sure that the some 100,000 local residents are able to be fully engaged in the work in preserving and restoring the temple, which is such an important tourism asset for Cambodia. And in Laos, we've been doing some very interesting work in ecotourism in the Namha National Protected Area. In Tonga, too, we've been working with the government to define a framework for whale watching, which has become very popular for ecotourism, but there's a significant issue now around overexploitation. So just some examples of how donors can engage with their partners to work together, find out the local needs, and think about investing in tourism that is really long-term, sustainable, and ethical. And at the micro level, a new initiative that is proving very successful has been business mentoring. So many SMEs who want to set up a tourist business don't know how to connect to the internet, don't know how to make sure that they can run the business in a way that's profitable. So we now have a business mentoring program in the Pacific that has got a number of small businesses who have been floundering, hooked into global supply chains for tourism that are truly micro and allow tourists a really different experience that is linked in with indigenous populations. So just to finish, I wanted to echo the words that Patricia Francis spoke yesterday. She said, we've done a lot of talking. It's time for action. And Patricia and I were together at the Global Summit of Women in China last year with the CEO of Carnival Cruises, Anne Sherry. And the three of us put our heads together and thought, well, how can we really make a large difference in the Pacific, where there are 5 LDCs, but distance, the tyranny of distance, really is enormous. And Carnival, as the largest shipping company in the Pacific, had also been wondering, how do they educate their clients about the importance of sustainable and ethical tourism? And so we now have a tripartite public-private partnership where the ITC is bringing its global expertise into the Pacific to ensure that supply chains, etc., are able to be localized. Carnival Cruises is bringing the client base, educating the client base to show demand for local product. And the New Zealand Aid Program is working with local entrepreneurs and the local population to facilitate simple things like handicrafts where there will be a market, and that is creating an interesting opportunity for families in the Pacific to be able to pay school fees. So it's a real win-win situation, a different kind of public-private partnership where each partner does a different kind of analysis and brings something to the table. But we very much hope that we're going to be able to report to you in future years of that kind of approach to bringing the donor community, the business community, and the expertise of international organizations together to create a better world. Thank you.